Thanks for having me. It's really humbling to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. So my talk today is about player rehab. I've been fortunate enough to work in professional men's and now women's soccer for the past 5 years, predominantly working in player rehab and return to play. So today I'm going to present a practical application of how we use GPS in helping the player get back as quickly and as safely as possible. So my talk is a very practical and applied talk. I'm going to focus on 2 points. One is how do we use GPS to plan the rehab period? And 2, how do we use GPS to help decide if the player is ready to return to play? Just a little bit about me. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. I started out studying physiotherapy at La Trobe University in Melbourne. I worked for this men's team in Melbourne called the Melbourne Heart from 2012 to 2014. In 2014, our club was purchased by the City Football Group and we became Melbourne City. At this point, my role was refined into being the rehab physio. We had the luxury of having 3 physios for one team, and my role was to work with the rehab players. So it was in this period where I was very fortunate enough to be able to spend my whole working life working with 2 or 3 athletes. I spent a number of periods in Australia and abroad working with one athlete, for 5-6 weeks at a time. And it was these experiences working in such an intense period of time with one athlete where I sort of developed a method of rehab. I'm going to present that to you today. I came to Seattle in May of last year to do an intensive rehab. It was a 5-weeker with one of their players. The rehab went well. The club offered me a position to stay. So my 5-week trip to Seattle has turned into me moving across the world. Now I live in Seattle. So my job here is I oversee the medical and the sports science areas. And I'm the one point of communication to our coach and to our ownership. Recently, sorry I didn't start my timer. Recently I've been involved with Microsoft to develop their sports performance platform, which was launched earlier this month at the # conference. So if you do have any inquiries or you're interested in that, there is an inquiry form, that bottom link, which you can get if you just Google sports performance platform. So you can inquire about that if you are interested. So the rehab method, and this is what I'm hoping to bring some value to this conference. I think in pro sport, it's been mentioned a few times, is you need to have a method, you need to have your own philosophy. When the pressure comes and you need to make quick decisions, big decisions, you have to fall back on something. And for me, it's been the development of a method of rehab. So I think about rehab in 4 stages. Player gets injured, they're off the field, unable to train, unable to play. So this is the acute off-field period. Once they get back on the field, they can start running, and they can start doing some ball work. This is called on-pitch rehab. We're doing things on the field to help them rehabilitate from their injury. The 3rd stage is when they join back in with the team. They might be doing non-contact drills, just parts of team training. This is the modified training and a reconditioning phase, which I'll go through. The 4th stage is when the player's doing full team training and they're preparing to be ready to play a full game. The difference in soccer is most of the players, you can only make 3 subs, so the player has to, if they start the game, most likely play the whole game, or they're going to come off the bench and maybe play 30 minutes. So preparing the player to be able to get through a full game is really important. So the key pillars to rehab and to successful rehab, I think there are 4 key pillars. My talk today is going to focus on the last 2, but the key pillars are I cycle through 4 phases of gym and conditioning. I focus a lot on avoiding deconditioning in the off-field, on the acute off-field period. And this is referring to the rest of their body, making sure that they're not losing strength, losing fitness while they're not training. Thirdly, the on-pitch rehab and reconditioning. And 4, once they get back in with the team, we go through 3 distinct cycles in terms of their progression back to full training and full games. So this is the 4-phase gym and conditioning method that I use. And I just paired gym and conditioning principles. This isn't anything new, but for me it's important to have a clear emphasis at all times in terms of what you're doing in the gym and what you're doing from a conditioning perspective. So clear emphasis in terms of, we start with higher rep, local muscular endurance, pairing it with aerobic capacity. Cycle through hypertrophy, aerobic power, maximal strength, speed endurance, and then power in the gym and speed on the field. The key thing here is to try and avoid conflicting gains. So it's a good pairing of gym and conditioning. Have a clear emphasis, and you must cycle through all 4 stages. This is the biggest thing that I've learned. I think depending on how long the rehab period is, whether it's 3 weeks, 13 weeks, 20 weeks, you have to cycle through all 4 phases. I think regaining power in a rehab setting in the gym is a really interesting area. And it's an area that I've been playing around with a lot lately, because it's very different to regaining power in a normal fit player. So avoiding deconditioning. This is a really crucial part of rehab. For the period that the player is not training and not playing, they're losing fitness. They're losing their chronic load. So the more you can do here to keep them fit, to keep them strong, the more resilient they'll be when they get back on the field, and the harder you can push them. So the key elements to avoiding this player from losing condition are, you need to target every major muscle group in the body, essentially, or the lower body for a soccer player. You need to prevent loss of eccentric muscle strength. We know that goes down very quickly when a player isn't training. Maintain tendon load capacity. Maintain areas of previous injury. This is where it's really important to know the athlete in terms of what injuries they've had in the past. If you have a chronic hamstring on the other leg, to the injured leg, and you let that lie dormant for 4 weeks, they'll lose a lot of strength, more risk of injury when they come back on the field. So focus on areas of previous injury and maintain aerobic capacity and aerobic power. And I'll finish with why that's the case. So in terms of how I use GPS to plan the rehab. So I use a simple calendar view like this with day-to-day GPS metrics. This is the base, I guess, level of metrics that I use for most cases. I'm going to look at total distance, play load, which has been spoken about a lot today, high-speed running. So in women's soccer, high-speed running is over 17.82. Sprint distance is defined as over 22.72. I look at the number of high-intensity runs and top speed. A key thing I've noted there is, I think for rehab, you need to take minutes and RPE for every single session that you do. So I'll take minutes and RPE for all their gym, all their cross-training, all their rehab sessions, put that into the calendar, and then see what their total weekly load is. Because often for a rehab player, they're doing all these extra sessions, so their total workload for the week is actually higher than what they were doing when they were fit. So from a risk of getting ill in terms of total workload, monitor minutes and RPE for every single session. I often look at accels, decels, and then any other injury-specific metrics. So the key thing to planning a rehab is you need to plan the whole period from start to finish in terms of GPS metrics, in terms of when they're going to be on the field, what they're going to do on the field, when they'll join back in team training. So figure out how long it's going to take with your medical staff. Is it going to take 6 weeks? Is it going to take 8 weeks? And then plan the whole period. Your planning will start by determining the end point. So the end point will be when the player's in full training and they're playing a full game. So work out for that week what that load is going to be. Determine what a full game looks like for that player. So analyze your previous games data to work out what a full game looks like, and then determine the match intensity. So this is just Seattle Rain 2016. This is just one player, total distance, week to week. So you just look at this. I like to look back as long as possible, as much data as you have, look the whole way back, and work out what the average training load is for that 1 week. So for all my examples, I've chosen total distance, but you need to look at other metrics as well. So for us, in a total distance scenario, the average is going to be around 24K a week. What you can do, and what you should be able to do, is predict in the week that the player is going to return what the training load will be. Look at your calendar, how many sessions do we have, who we're playing, and try and predict what that weekly total will be in that last week. So for us, this was 2 weeks ago against Boston. This is total distance for our players. You can see the highest is 11.5K. Obviously the subs are at the bottom there, but the lowest is 8.5. So for soccer, in women's soccer, we're covering inside the game 8.5 to 11.5K. In terms of high-speed running, you can see the highest is over 1,000 meters high speed and over 300 meters sprint. But the key thing is to see that there is some variation. So some players will sprint more. Generally, the players in a wide position sprint more. Players who play centrally will sprint less. So work out what it is for that player in terms of what the game looks like. This is an example I've pulled. This is based on men's team data and I guess modeling, so this was a 13-week MCL. And you can see we've determined that the 13th week, the week where he does full training and plays a full game, he's going to cover 27.5 kilometers. So the trick is, how do we get him from having 4 weeks of nothing, no running, to being able to cover that amount of distance, play a full game in the 13th week? So this is how we do it. So the first 4 weeks, it's the acute off-field stage. He's not running, he's off the field. The key thing here is avoid deconditioning. Work hard in the gym where you can, work hard cross-training. The first 2 weeks, when they get back on the field, I call the on-pitch rehab stage, where they're not joining in with any team training. They're just working with yourself, PT, sports scientist, whoever it is, on the field, doing one-to-one training. And here you're just building capacity. The third stage is from week 7 to 12, to 10, 7 to 10, so 4-week period. And this is the modified team training and reconditioning phase, which I'll explain a little bit later. The key thing here is you can see this is the biggest spike in the load in those 4 weeks. And you do that by biasing the stimulus in a quality versus quantity manner, which I'll go through. The last 3 weeks are full training and a match preparation phase, where you're preparing the player to play a full game. So 13-week total. So if you look at it from an acute to chronic ratio standpoint, you can see in the first 2 weeks, obviously it's a high ratio, he hasn't been on the field at all. But in that middle 4 weeks, we have the highest numbers, 1.7, 1.4, 1.3, 1.3. So the key thing here is you spike the load in that section of the rehab, in that middle 4 weeks. In the peak in week 10, you need to try and get the player to the level where they're going to have to reach in their return week. So for us, it was 27.5, and we got him to 28K in week 10. To get that load right up there, taper him down, and then bring him back up. The trick here is you can see, or the advantage here is that in the last 3 weeks, the ratio is 1, 1, 1.1, so very safe. So the method here is spike the load early, get the work in, taper down, and then bring back up to the game. I think a mistake that I've seen a lot, and I did this a lot when I first started, was just incrementally each week building up the load. But what happens then is the week that they return to play, they do full training, full game, it's the biggest week that they've done in 13 weeks. And that poses a big problem. So once they're back on the field, you need to go through 3 distinct weekly microcycle periodizations. There's a build-up phase, the reconditioning phase, and the match preparation phase. This, for me, is for rehab periods that are over 6 weeks. If it's under 6 weeks and you haven't got a lot of time, you do a test and a rest, which I can explain. So the build-up phase, it's their first time on the field. We're just building up their capacity. So generally, you can start day on, day off, and then go to 2 days in a row if you feel they're ready. But here, the periodization is very even. First session 3K, Wednesday session 3K, Friday 3K. It's all very even. Not very hard, just building capacity. So we have no peaks, not a lot of muscle soreness, just getting in training to build up capacity. The second phase, the reconditioning phase, this is where the real work gets done. So here we work in a 2 days on in a row, 1 day off, 2 days on. But the way you bias this is the first day is a quality day and the second day a quantity day. Now the quality and quantity methodology was a City Football Group methodology that I was taught and that I've sort of run with and I still use. But the way this works is the first day, you do the highest load activities for that injury, quality day. Then you do heavy gym specific to the injury. The second day, it's your low risk activities, quantity. So here, the weekly periodization is up and down a bit more. First day, 3K, second day, 5K, day off, 3K, 5K. And you build that up. So in the scenario we had before, we have 4 weeks of this, building up to full team training. So the quality and quantity bias is really important. This is how you can get through high chronic workloads, so the high acute to chronic ratios safely, is to bias what you do on day 1 versus day 2. So the quality day, you do the activities that are the highest risk to that injury, the highest load. Typically, it's going to be high-speed running, sprinting, reaching top speed, accelerating, and stopping with intensity. In terms of soccer, the highest load activities generally are kicking long, kicking off the lace, shooting when you're taking 2 touches. So in soccer, there's 2 ways to kick the ball. One is you kick it on the inside of your foot, use your adductor. And secondly, off your lace, use your rec fem more. So on the quality days, you generally do the more explosive kicking. So it's a high intensity, low volume, short efforts, long rest, and then you pair that with your heaviest gym. A lot of people ask me, why do you do the highest load day first and not second when they have the day off after the high load day? And the answer is that you want them to do the most risky activities on the first day when they're the most fresh. So I don't want them coming in the second day after doing a high volume day, trying to do the most risky activities. So you do all your high risk stuff on the first day. On the second day, you do low risk activities, so lower speed running, less intensity, but higher volume. So one thing that is key to this is to determine what activities are the highest load for that injury. So the easiest ones are sprinting will put stress on the hamstring. So if you have a hamstring strain, you're going to do your sprinting on the first day. But what is it for an ankle, an adductor, a soleus? So I just put down a little summary here. So hamstring strain, obviously, it's fast running and kicking with a big follow through. The GPS metric is high speed running and sprint distance. For a quad strain, it's going to be, again, sprinting, but it's going to be more accelerating and kicking on the lace. So again, it's high speed running, sprint distance, and acceleration. For an adductor, very different. It's going to be your change of direction, going laterally, side to side. So you can track that with the GPS through change of direction. and you can filter out the 3D player load to look at lateral movement. So in the quality quantity scenario here, it's on the first day you do all your lateral movement, and the second day you just run in a straight line and get lots of volume in. For anterior knee pain, it's going to be decelerating, that eccentric load in the quad, putting force through the anterior knee. It's going to be jumping and landing. So you can look at your decels and also your vertical 1D player load. For the soleus, soleus is by far, I think, the most tricky muscle strain to rehab, because every time you go on the field, it's hard to bias it out of the equation. But the highest load days for the soleus are your high volume, slower running. Just think about when you run the marathon, the next day, you can't walk down the stairs because your soleus is so tight. For acute ankle sprains, it's going to be a change of direction, is higher load than running in a straight line. Also kicking on the contralateral foot, especially if it's a medial ankle. For your MCL, it's going to be change of direction, instep kicking, and you can track that as well. So it's really important at the start of your rehab to determine what is the highest load activity for that injury, work out, can you track that through the GPS, or is it just a football action, but then plan to do that on your quality day. So the match preparation phase is the last phase. So this is the phase where the player is back in a normal weekly rhythm of the rest of the players. So in soccer, in the Women's Soccer League, we play one game a week. So the rhythm looks like this. We'll train twice early in the week, moderate to hard, a day off, a moderate session, a light session, and then a game. So the key thing to this phase is to get the rehab player back in the rhythm of a normal player. Previously in the reconditioning phase, it was all like moderate, 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 moderate. In this phase, it's moderate, hard, moderate, light, really hard. So you've got to really make that distinction. So we've got 3 weeks to get them back to be available for the match. So test and rest. So for short rehabs, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, you haven't got time to filter through all of this. So you need to do a test and rest. And this involves building the player up to a point where you can test them sufficiently to assess their suitability to return. And after that test, they have to rest until the game. Otherwise, they're going to go into the game fatigued and with a high risk of injury. So this was, I know you can't see this, but this was the rehab that brought me to Seattle. It was a 5-week intensive lateral tibial plateau fracture. So this was a very aggressive, very quick return. So we tested her the bottom red session, which was actually a friendly game against Arsenal, but that was the test to play 30 minutes. And then the 2 days before the game, she virtually did nothing, recover, and then played a full game on the Sunday. So the way you pitch this to your coach is, this player can play, but the 2 days before the game, they virtually can't train. Otherwise, they're going to be too fatigued, and they're at a high risk of not getting through the game. So that's a test and rest. The second point to my talk is using GPS to determine return to play. Now, there's 2 levels to this. The first level is just to look at your week-to-week periodization, look at your acute to chronic ratio, and just see what it is. If you have a high acute to chronic ratio, it doesn't mean that they can't play, but it just means they're at a higher risk. So here you're just assessing risk. Have you gone through the 3 phases? Have you conditioned them well in that reconditioning phase? Have they done enough match stimulation sessions to be ready? The second level, and the first level is really just looking at volume. Have they covered the volume adequately to be ready to play? But the second level is to look at intensity of the match. So you need to determine what the match intensity is and make sure that the player has trained at the match intensity prior to their return. Because all well and good for them to have done an 8K session, 9K session, 1,000 meters high speed, but if it's not constructed in a way that mimics a match intensity, then they're not actually ready. So you can look at intensity measures. Meters per minute is the most simple. You can see our players range from 90 to 120 for the 90-minute match. This is obviously the average, so there's going to be periods where they're going to be above that and below that, but at least gives you some sort of marker of what the intensity is for the match. Player load per minute ranges from 7 to 12. Again, will fluctuate, but at least it gives you some idea of the match intensity. Repeat high intensity efforts is an interesting one. Catapult have a standard metric of 3 efforts in 21 seconds. So you can see the highest was 55 for the 90 minutes. So yeah, determine what the match intensity is. In the match preparation period, on the game day, you're going to do a match simulation session, where you're going to do a session where they're going to train at the match intensity. At the end of it, you split your data, look at it and say, okay, well, did they train at the match intensity? And that will help give you weight as to whether the player is ready or not. In terms of determining the outcome, this is something that I've been looking at more, and not just did the player get injured or not. That's a simple one. But performance outcomes, talk to the coach. Did they perform their role? Did we win the game? From a conditioning aspect, look at the GPS numbers from their return game. Was the volume what we expected? Was their work rate in terms of their intensity, meters per minute, player load per minute, repeat high intensity efforts? Was that what they would normally do? And thirdly, time above 90%. So our players wear heart rate monitors in games. So we have heart rate data back. And a big one in terms of the quality of your rehab was the time above 90% in the game. So I've seen rehab players come back and they spend 60 minutes with their heart rate above 90, and that's really uncomfortable. With your heart rate above 90, you can't speak, you can't communicate to your players, to your teammates. It's harder to make decisions. So if you haven't conditioned them properly and their heart rate's too high for the game, it's going to affect their ability to perform. So look at that in terms of determining the outcome. That's all. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes.
Nick, are you matching up your weight room sessions as far as injuries go with the high intensity loads? Are you trying to hit those from the same perspective as well as on the field type stuff?
So in the reconditioning phase, on the quality day, you're doing your high intensity runs, and then in the afternoon, you're doing your heavy gym. So we pair that. But then in the match preparation phase, for us, we generally do weight training on the second day before the day off. So because they're back in the team rhythm, that ends up being the highest day of the week, plus gym, then the day off. So it depends on what stage of the rehab. But yeah, we do match the high risk, the high load day with the heaviest gym. Yeah.
Any other questions? Excellent, Nick. Thank you very much.
No worries.